Kremena, lovely to meet you today. I believe you're joining us from
Chris, yeah.
I believe you're joining us from Halifax, out in Canada.
Yes, Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Oh, it looks lovely, I have to say. So I'm very envious. Vested, we want to talk about Vested, and you had quite a lot of experience in Vested and health. And I think you've had a couple of different projects you've worked on that side of things. Shall we start with the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority, which is the first public-private sector such deal. Is that fair?
Yes, that's indeed the case. So that contract right now is actually 6.5 years in. It was the first time public procurement actually used Vested. So it was exciting that way because it was new ground for all of us in public procurement in particular. And how can we do a vested relationship, which was something new at the time, new to Canada. We did want to do something different. We did want to engage our service providers in a different way that brings more innovations to the table, but also brings a different kind of relationship.
And what was your findings of that experience?
So it was a great experience. It was a long journey for us because, as I mentioned, it was the first one. And at the time, Vested hasn't created yet. They had the idea about the RF partner, but they didn't have as much in terms of documents and methodology developed. So what we've done, we've used an existing model on the market, which was joint solutioning, and we kind of had to retrofit it to fit with our purposes to implement Vested. We were more than pleased with the results. At some points, we did have our doubts, of course, on the journey. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it was completely different experience for everyone involved.
Yeah, and you created a couple of new terms as you went, didn't you? Because I think if I'm reading rightly, you changed the scope of the project to be broader, so it made it easier for people. And you created a term called mutual value solution at the time as well.
Yes, we did want, because it wasn't like pure joint solution. It was something different, and we wanted to send that signal to the market because, as you know, service providers, when they see a deal of that magnitude on the market, they do want to get the business. So we wanted, as a buyer at the time, to send the message to the marketplace that it is going to be different and it's going to be mutual value. It's not going to be just for us, but it's going to be to the service providers. And just as an aside, there were 3 big players in Canada at the time for the services that we sourced. And so we had a relationship with them in the past, different kind of relationship, more traditional of a sort. So we've gone through, that was our 3rd generation of outsourcing for the same services with the same players on the marketplace. So it was important for us to differentiate and say, we're not going to do business the same way that we did it in the past. And as you know, it's all about trust with Vested, Chris. And it's how do you actually get the marketplace to trust that this time you're going to be different as a buyer, right? I think what helped is this long journey during the procurement process that we took, as the way we crafted it, it was very flexible in that after each phase, we could change if things were not moving the way that both parties intended it. We also had actually, before we even crafted the procurement documentation and the procurement process, we had a session with all the service providers on like our big service providers, and we said, you know what, we want to change. Come back and tell us what's new and exciting. How do you want actually to be asked to bid on a project? What do we need to do different to make sure that you put your best foot forward? So that helped because they did tell us, to the extent that it was possible for them to tell us without offending us, how we should better procure, right? And how we can get best out of what they have to offer. And actually, some of them did bring up Vested as a model on the marketplace. And that's how we went about it.
And what was your greatest learning from that period, from that time, that project?
I think it's trust the process, and it's the good thing about Vested is it's not that it's just an idea. They have a great methodology. So we at the time we did use the services of a center of excellence because as being in the public eye, we just wanted to make sure that we're going to implement the process properly. We didn't use them during the procurement, but we used them once we selected a preferred proponent to get into negotiations with and in the crafting of the vested agreement. But I must say, it was almost like our fallback safety net, having the Center of Excellence validate what we are doing. But by following the process that Vested created step by step, you actually can get there on your own. And that is something that I really like about it, is that sometimes it feels like you're meandering a little bit, but it's important to follow the process and not go through shortcuts, because that's when the relationship with the service provider is developed and the trust is built.
I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? People talk about lovely words like trust and culture and shared values, but actually it is about really quite deep issues, and trying to find that solution is quite hard, isn't it?
It is hard, especially if you have somebody that you have worked with under a different framework, more traditional framework, because how come now all of a sudden I changed that and I actually changed my perception of you when I have like years and years of experiences where this didn't work. And I think that you just have to trust the process. And I remember when we first kind of embarked on that process, and Kate for the first time came and talked to us about Vested and talked about trust, and I was like she opened for questions, and I was like, but how can I trust, right? And she's like, well, you just choose to trust, and that kind of stuck with me. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's simple, but it isn't, especially if you have previous experiences. So but the thing is, you have to hold yourself accountable because you made the choice to do something different. So you cannot continue to behave the old way and expect different results. If you're expecting the service provider or your partner in business to change, you have to change too.
That's a really interesting one. You're now doing consultancy. Has it changed the way you think about consultancy?
I don't think it changed, but like with Vested, and it's everything. Every time I do a new project, I see things a little bit differently. I'd say like you just dive deeper, or something that before you couldn't connect to now makes more sense. I think the most rewarding experience to me is when you have people in the room that are going to build this exciting new relationship with each other, and kind of the penny drops, and it's like you kind of see it, right? Initially, it's kind of people are guarded. You talk about the values, you talk about honesty, you kind of make them to connect to that in a business sense, and it's kind of hard. And then after a few sessions, it kind of starts to come more naturally. And it's all about behaviors and learned behaviors and changing the way you do it. But it doesn't happen overnight. But when it happens, oh my God, it's just such a different environment, and the way they treat each other and the way they kind of solve issues and the way they even look at issues. It's not like it's an issue and why is this issue here? It's like business happens, right? There are always going to be issues. It's how do we solve these issues? Do we have the mechanisms in place to be able to resolve them in a way that's going to help us both move forward? And I think that's what's great about Vested.
Oh, look, it's led to a fascinating debate, I find, because you're right. The vested advocates talk about you choose to trust, and yet other consultants will argue, but we do this anyway, but we don't choose to trust. But actually, you got to actually choose that road, haven't you? Which actually is a big jump for people.
It was a big jump for me, and I think that it's part of our upbringing. When you're kind of a little kid, you're very trusting, right? And then your parents tell you, well, you can't trust strangers and all these things, and you have to exercise critical thinking, and you always have to have this on the back of your mind that it's kind of like you can't necessarily trust and take everything at face value because we want our kids to be safe, right? So when you kind of move to the business world, and especially like I don't know how it is in the UK, but here when you talk about business, it's all about diversification and kind of hedging your risk and keeping your options open. And when you get something like vested that tells you actually the opposite, it's counterintuitive to everything you've learned, right? And it's kind of, it makes sense, but you kind of feel, oh, but am I not exposing myself too much? Like, because you basically teach, don't have like 3 different suppliers just to kind of keep not all your eggs in one basket, but have one supplier and do great things with that supplier because that's the right supplier, right? So how do you make that jump when all your life you've been taught that you should not keep all your eggs in one basket, right? But now that I kind of see in it is, it makes sense because it's such an investment in a relationship. You cannot have that relationship with everybody, right? And it's like in your personal life, you click with some people more than you click with other people. And those are the relationship where you kind of, you feel most alive, you enjoy most, and you achieve most. And it's the same in business too, but it's kind of, how do you bring yourself to work every day? Not that business persona, but the simple values that Vested talks about, the honesty, the equity, all those guiding principles that we want to live by. And we live by more or less in our personal life, but for some reason in the business working relationship, those sometimes change. And it's kind of strange how for so many years we operated that way.
It is. Now, you've just done another vested project, I believe, for another health authority. Is that correct?
Yes. I've done actually another one for Eastern Health. It's in Newfoundland. They had the service provider for many years. And in public procurement, as you know, we can't necessarily roll over contracts just because it's public procurement and every so often you have to go to market. So they had this company for many years and the contract expired and they went to market and they wanted to do vested. They followed the RF partner process, the newest research and the newest recommendation from the University of Tennessee. It was a different process in that in certain ways it was a bit more fast-tracked and it was more focused actually on the relationship and selecting the right partner, and less so on the actual solution up front, but developing the solution as they went into negotiating a contract. And so what I'd say is that I think once you have a successful deal in an industry like the Vancouver Coastal Health, they heard about it, they went and visited Vancouver Coastal Health, they talked to the people that were involved in the deal on the government side, and they really wanted to do something like that. They wanted that because what they had into a more standard relationship before didn't get them where they wanted to go. And I think with this relationship, it's like, it's an amazing team. Like from day one, it's just having the right individuals in the room makes all the difference. And I'd say like even on the Vancouver Coastal Health, you can't, you have to put believers in your core team. You have to put people that really believe that this is possible, vested is possible. Otherwise, you won't get anywhere because it's a long journey. It's a lot of work to get there. And if you have people that constantly drag down the team and question why are we doing this, and we've always done it that way, it's just not going to happen. So these guys, they call themselves, oh, sorry.
No, please carry on.
So these guys, they call themselves one team from the day one. And they actually put new players from both the service provider and the health authority leading this initiative. And I think because they knew, they've heard about maybe some issues in the past, but those were some brand new people with new personalities, and they turned things around. And I'm so happy for them because kind of like when I see the lights coming up every day and talking about certain conversation and how they deal with issues and sitting together in the room, and they still haven't kind of lost their patience and said, oh, you know what, it's you service provider, that's why you have it here. Like the health authority is right there with them. And it's like now with COVID, for example, so many challenges, right? Whatever you've planned that's going to happen, it didn't happen, right? So things change daily, and the service provider, like it's totally different scope of work of what you intended the scope of work being, or maybe additional scope of work. But the health authority is right there with them, and they're backing them up because they know that the more they communicate their needs, the better their needs will be met by the service provider. And of course, in return, in line with the reciprocity, they're kind of giving more business to the service provider. So it's a win-win for both parties.
No, that's interesting, isn't it? And is it about leadership? Does it start with leadership, or is it something deeper?
Sorry, say that question again.
Is it about leadership? Is leadership the key piece? Because actually trust comes from leadership, doesn't it? You're talking about believers being in the team, but does that start with the leadership piece?
Of course, it has to be driven from the top, right? We're very lucky with Eastern Health because it was driven from the executives. We had VPs on the core teams, which is something that you rarely see because those people are busy. And our steering committee was half of their executive team on it. And that made all the difference because those are the people, those are the champions that are going to support the change on the buyer side. Same on the service provider side. They had their president of healthcare actually involved on the steering committee and driving this and supporting it and staying behind. I mean, that's another thing, as you know, it's one thing to kind of bundle it inside the contract and celebrate it and everybody lives in different direction. But that's not how change happens. It's all about change management and the real work starts then. So having all these people staying behind, the people that were involved in crafting the deal and remember the intent and know why they want to change and what the vision is, it's so important to make it successful.
Oh, that's interesting. And what advice would you give anybody now looking at Vested?
Just do it. If you've looked at it and it kind of tingled your interest and you say, well, wow, this is something like very exciting, just kind of be brave and do it. It's totally worth it. Select the right relationship where you want to implement it and just go ahead and do it.
And what are your hopes for Vested going forward?
What I hope for Vested?
Vested, yeah.
I'd like the fact that they've built like a big ecosystem of different professionals. There are people that are practicing the relationship. There are people that are coaches. I mean, once you get involved, I doubt that you want to go back to practicing a more traditional procurement or contracting. I know for myself personally, I don't. It changed me in such a way that even in my more traditional relationship, I'm starting to implement some elements in the way I behave with people. It just changes who you are, and because it's so much easier, it's so much more natural than being a muscular buyer or player. At least for me, that's what I find. So what I like for Vested is that it supports the ecosystem. I like where they're heading in terms of growing the movement, and I'm really happy to be part of it.
Oh, look, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Kremena. It's a real pleasure, and I hope you have enjoyed a long weekend.
Oh, thank you very much, and nice talking to you, Chris.